Having been warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they went home by a different road. By a different road. I want to talk today about stepping out on knowledge that is not our own. I want to talk today about stepping out on knowledge that is not our own. We got a thriller of a story this morning in the gospel, the story of the Magi, and you all know it, but if you're looking in the Gospels for anything that looks like kind of a spy thriller or a nail-biter, it's the story of the Magi is where you'll find it. Magi is not a word that we really use today outside of when we're talking about this story. But Magi is a word for the priests of the Zoroastrian faith. There are actually still Magi in the world today. They read the stars. They were renowned in the ancient world for their skill as astronomers. In the ancient world, if you were looking to have your fortune told and you had the money to pay for it, you were going to find a Magi to tell you what was going to happen next. We read in the book of the prophet Daniel, and this is confirmed in history, that the king of Persia, the emperor of Persia, because of their great skill and renown in telling the future, had gathered a group of Magi together to be his sort of special court of advisors, his special council. And when the Persian Empire fell, and the Parthian Empire took over, the Parthian Empire welcomed that same group of Magi to lead him and counsel him. And I want to suggest to you that it's pretty clear when we read the Gospel of Matthew that it's this group of royal astronomers, this group of royal Magi that we're hearing about in the story today. And the reason that we know that is because of the gifts that they bring. Gold, frankincense, myrrh. These were wealthy, costly, luxury items, so your average Magi, a kind of local village priest hanging out somewhere in the hill country of Iran, couldn't afford these things. But if you were part of that special council close to the emperor, you could get your hands on them. There was power and prestige and respect that came with being that close to the emperor, but there were also certain responsibilities as well. It meant you couldn't just go where you wanted to, when you wanted to. You had to ask permission. So when we hear that they come bringing these royal gifts, Matthew wants us to understand that they've been sent on an errand by the emperor of Parthia. So Parthia at this time, and you're getting a little history, and I'm sorry there, but you know there's things we have to understand if we want to know what's going on in the Gospels. Parthia at the time was Rome's major rival. In this part of the world, they were the two superpowers of the day, and they were sort of locked in a Cold War. Neither one wanted to go into outright fighting, but they were kind of both vying for position and rank. And that piece of territory where Jesus is born, the Holy Land, Judea, Israel, was a critical piece of real estate the way it still is today. It was a critical trade route from the north to the south, and going east to west, it was a critical port for ships coming in off the Mediterranean. So if you controlled that, it gave you power in the region. And at this point in time, Rome controlled it. So we might ask ourselves, why does the emperor of Parthia send his Magi there? But it's pretty clear what's going on when you read it and get a little sense of what's happening there. They've seen this star. They're predicting the future, and they say a new king will rise over Judea, a king like no one has seen before. And the emperor of Parthia, seeing this and thinking about it, sees an opportunity, right, to kind of game the system, to manipulate events, to kind of shift the geopolitical power structure, to get in good with this new regime. And so, without ever having to send his armies in, tilt the balance of power in Judea away from Rome and towards Parthia. So he sends them and says, send them gifts and give him homage and tell him if he wants a friend, he's got a friend in Parthia. And so they travel the long road and they arrive in Judea, and the very first thing they do is they go to visit Herod, which they do because they're diplomats, right? They know how this works. And if you go to visit a foreign country and you're a foreign dignitary, the first thing you've got to do is visit the local government. When a foreign head of state comes to the U.S., he's got to go to the White House first. You may remember just a few years back, I guess it was about 6 years ago now, the Speaker of the House invited the Prime Minister of Israel to speak to the House without conferring with the White House first, and it was a big to-do, right? There was trouble. So the emperor of Parthia didn't want to make any trouble, so he makes sure that they follow diplomatic protocol. He's not trying to start a war with Rome. He's just trying to kind of shift things a little bit. So they go to Herod, and as they're supposed to, they explain what they're there for. They say, we'd like passage to go through Judea. Herod says, well, what are you doing here? And they say, a new king has arisen. We've seen his name written in the stars who will rule over Judah. And we're told that Herod trembles, and all of Jerusalem trembles with him. Because Herod, you see, was a pretender king. His claim to the throne was really tenuous. There was this dynasty of kings and queens, the Hasmonean dynasty, that had ruled over Israel for about 200 years at that, 300 years at that point. 200 years. And they were generally well-liked. People didn't feel pretty strongly about them one way or another. But everyone knew that they weren't 100% legitimate. They weren't in the line of David, so they didn't really have the right claim to the throne. They also said that they were the high priests, not only kings, but high priests. And they weren't in the line of Aaron, where the high priest should come from, so everyone had their questions and doubts about them. But Herod was something else entirely. Herod had no connection to the royal family when he was born, but he was the son of a man who had garnered power and influence by collaborating with the Romans. He was a Roman military officer who had become quite prominent in Judah. And when Herod the younger was born, he used that influence and power to gain prestige for himself and political access and influence, and married into the Hasmonean dynasty and declared himself king. And as soon as he did that, he dissolved the dynasty and said, I will stand as king alone. And he preserved his power by continuing that collaboration with the Romans. So nobody really believed that he should be king. And it happened also that he was kind of brutal and capricious and not well liked at all. So he always had this sense that he was just kind of holding on to the throne right by the fingernails and just grasping it to keep there. So when the Magi come and they say, this king has been born, who, as it's laid out in the first chapter of the Gospel of Matthew, is directly in the line of David on both his mother and his father's side, who has a rightful claim to the throne, Herod knows that this king means trouble for him. So he thinks that he's slick, and he says, okay, well, he gathers his scholars together and says, so where is this Messiah supposed to be born? And they say, Bethlehem. Well, Bethlehem's a big place, so he needs a little bit more information. He goes back to the Magi and he says, well, when did you first see the star? When was this kid actually born? How old is he right now? And writes down the date. And then because Bethlehem's a big place and he doesn't know exactly where this child is, he sends them out again and he says, go, find the child, give him homage, and when you find him, come back to me and tell me where he is so I can also go and do him homage. And you all knew when we were reading the gospel what he intends to do. He's going to find that child and kill it. The Magi go out. And they bring their gifts, they lay out the gold, the frankincense, and the myrrh. And then we're told that they're warned in a dream not to go home by the same route, not to return to Herod, so they go home by a different route. And Herod, when he sees that they haven't returned, when he realizes that he's been outmaneuvered, he rages. And all of the fears that Jerusalem had, when we're told that Jerusalem trembles with him because they know what happens when this man gets angry, are realized. He sends his armies to Bethlehem and has them slaughter all of the infants, figuring that if he can't find the one kid that he's looking for, he's going to kill them all just to be sure. Fortunately, and it's a nail-biter, Joseph has received a dream to himself saying, get out of there right quick. And by the grace of God, they have these gifts, gold and frankincense and myrrh, that can help pay their way on this journey to a foreign land where they have no family or friends. So you can see it's kind of spine-chilling, and it's a bit of a nail-biter in this whole story as it's coming out. For me, the way I read this story and understand it was changed forever 2 years ago. Because you may remember 2 years ago on Epiphany, on January 6, 2021, as we were celebrating this story of the arrival of the kings, the Capitol building, which many of us regard as the kind of symbolic heart of our democracy, was put under siege. And we saw this very strange kind of parallel where it seemed that this illegitimate ruler, whose kind of temper tantrums were well known and fearful, realized that he had been outmaneuvered and that a new king was going to arise, a new ruler was going to arise, and so he unleashed violence on an innocent city. It sort of felt really oddly familiar. And it's an old story. In fact, when we look throughout history, it seems that this same kind of story just repeats itself over and over and over again. And after a while, we feel like we're just really tired and we want something new. It's very easy to read our Bible in light of current events, and we ought to do that because what's happening in the world matters deeply to God. But we also have to keep sight of the fact in the midst of it that no political change or transfer, none of the events of the world are the same as the coming of God's kingdom. That God's always business doing something new in the midst of it, bringing something new and greater. And the Magi saw that. The Magi stepped out on faith. So I want us to just take a moment and think about these group of scholars and what's going on with them and the way they find courage to step out on a new kind of knowledge, the kind of faith we're all called to. I mentioned at the beginning that these Magi were renowned astrologers, and in fact, we now have, you can find them in museums, the star maps they laid out, and they're incredibly detailed. They didn't have telescopes at the time, but every star that you can see with your naked eye appears on those star maps. They know exactly where they're supposed to be placed, at what time and hour you can find them, when you see them during the seasons, and which way they move. These guys were experts. Now, I know each and every one of you in your lives has one area at least where you say, I am an expert about this one field. I know this better than anyone else that I know, right? And there's this thing about expertise. It's good. We need it. But you can get really committed to it, so it's hard to actually let go when you find new information and knowledge, right? All of us sometimes in our areas of expertise are confronted by new facts and new realities that don't fit with what we've known before. And honestly, if you're like me, most of us react defensively at that point. We want to kind of sweep that new information under the rug and turn away from it and say, no, I know what's going on here. You need to trust me. The Magi, renowned experts known throughout the world, they knew the stars better than anyone else, are confronted by something new. A star that doesn't appear on their maps, that has no name, that none of them have seen before, and not only new, but traveling the wrong direction. And you have to think about this for a second. They come from the east, traveling west. They say, we followed the star, it's arising, which gives us the sense this star has risen up in the west, and they're traveling towards it, right? Now, I don't know if any of you have been out camping or just taken a moment to stare at the sky, right? But if you do, you know that the stars travel the same direction as the sun. They go from east to west. But this star rises in the west. So not only is it new and unknown to them, but it's breaking all the rules of how the heavens should work. So most of us as experts, right, in our fields of expertise, seeing this would say, let's not talk about that. That's just an anomaly. It's something off. But instead, they turn towards this knowledge. And they approach the emperor of Parthia and they say, we've seen this new star rising. It proclaims the coming of a new king. Let us go and greet him. Let's go bring him gifts. And the emperor sends them out. And they do as they're expected. They meet with Herod. But then a new piece of information comes to them. A dream that tells them, don't go back to Herod. Go home by a different route. And this is totally new and unexpected for them because, as I said, these men are astrologers. They read the stars to tell the future. They don't interpret dreams. This is a new kind of knowledge to them. And it requires them breaking protocol because Herod has given them direct orders. Come back to me and tell me what you found, right? And they're clearly trying to do their level best not to cause any kind of stir. And so they have to decide at this point, will we do things the way we have always done them, or will we go home by a different route and accept the consequences? We have to explain to the emperor of Parthia, why did we break protocol? Why is Herod so mad at us right now? What's going on? They're going to have to make account for what they've done. And yet still, having seen the face of Christ, right? Having come expecting just another story of political intrigue and struggle that they're so used to being part of the royal court. They see this child's face and they encounter something totally unexpected. And they step out on faith. They believe this dream and say, let's go home by a different route and hope and trust that something good will come of this. In this tired story of the world where we see, and we've been watching this whole last week, the struggles in Congress over the election of a new House, where it seems like we're constantly stuck in this work of political gamesmanship and the rest of us trying to make our lives seem to be the ones that suffer for it. Here and there throughout, we see the hope and possibility that God is doing something new in the midst of it. And it requires us taking hold of it to let go of our own expertise and understanding. As it says in Scripture, to lean not on our own knowledge, but to trust in the Lord. And if we can't do that, then just as we've seen throughout history, this same tired, painful, brutal story will just continue to repeat again and again and again. Christ is calling us to see new ways, to observe the ways that God is at work in our lives and turn towards them. And during this season of Epiphany, my prayer is that we find the courage to follow the example of the Magi. Amen.